She was just a black woman trying to enjoy one night off. That's all Tiffany wanted. One Friday, one birthday celebration with her girls. A dress she saved for special occasions, a gold clutch her mother gave her, and a left heel that was already pinching before she even walked through the door. She didn't know the club belonged to him. She didn't know that somewhere above her, behind dark glass, one of the most dangerous men in Chicago had stopped mid-sentence and was watching her laugh. Jang Hyun-woo, Korean Mafia Boss. A man with a dragon tattooed up his neck and enough power to make people disappear without raising his voice. A man who had not felt anything for anyone in years. He watched this black woman, ordinary, unaware, completely real in a room full of people performing, and he did something he had never done in his life. He bought the entire VIP section for a stranger, anonymously, just to see her smile again. What started as one inexplicable gesture became phone calls every day, then coffee, then dinner, then something neither of them had a name for yet. But when his enemies found out about her, when a photograph of Tiffany taken without her knowledge ended up on the wrong man's desk, everything she thought she understood about this man, and about herself, was about to be tested in ways she never saw coming. And what she said to him in that car, on that cold Chicago night, changed something in him that 20 years of power never could. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. She had picked the wrong shoes for a night she almost didn't attend. That thought crossed Tiffany Renee Caldwell's mind somewhere between the Uber ride and the moment the bouncer waved her group through the velvet rope without even checking her ID, which she had spent 45 seconds fishing out of her gold clutch for nothing. The shoes were beautiful. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that they were beautiful in the way things are when you only wear them twice a year and forget, every single time, that the left heel pinches the back of your ankle by the second hour. She made a mental note to remember that. She knew she wouldn't. Deja was already moving through the crowd ahead of her, arms raised, voice climbing above the music to say something that Tiffany couldn't hear. The other girls, Maya and Courtney, had dissolved into the pulse of the room, absorbed by the bass and the low amber light and the particular electricity of a Friday night in a city that didn't sleep out of principle. Tiffany followed, smiling the way she always smiled in rooms that were slightly too loud and slightly too full of people who looked like they belonged there more than she did. It wasn't insecurity, exactly. She knew who she was. She knew the value of her own company. She had simply spent enough years in corporate hallways, carrying other people's calendars, answering calls for men who couldn't remember her last name after 2 years of working 3 feet from their office, to understand that belonging somewhere and being allowed somewhere were 2 very different things. She wore both with grace. She had learned to. The club was called something in Korean that she hadn't caught from the outside sign, but the inside spoke a language she understood clearly: money, and the kind of taste that money buys when it has somewhere to go. The floors were polished black stone. The lighting was low and golden, like the inside of something expensive. The music was heavy but precise, the kind of sound design that costs more per hour than most people make in a week. Even the ice in the drinks looked intentional. Deja found a table near the main floor. Not VIP, not close, but decent. She ordered a round and announced loudly and joyfully that she was 28 years old and that anyone who had a problem with that could go home. Everyone laughed. Tiffany laughed too, genuinely this time. And for a moment, the left heel stopped mattering and the room stopped feeling like it belonged to someone else. She didn't know the exact moment he saw her. She would think about that later. The impossibility of pinpointing the second something irreversible begins. He had come into the club through a side entrance that the regular staff didn't use, flanked by two men in dark clothing who moved with the specific economy of people who are paid not to draw attention to themselves. He was not in a hurry. He was never in a hurry. Jung Hyun-woo moved through space the way water moves through stone. Not fast, not dramatic, simply inevitable. The club belonged to him in the most literal sense. His name was on the license, his money was in the walls, and every person working the floor that night had been hired through a chain of people who ultimately answered to him. He came in from time to time not to enjoy it, but to audit it, to feel the temperature of the room, to see if the thing he had built was still running the way he intended. He had 3 things to resolve that night: a supplier who had been skimming from the Eastern inventory, a conversation with a man who owed him a significant and overdue answer, and a renovation decision for the mezzanine that his architect had been waiting on for 11 days. He had every intention of being home before 1 in the morning. He was on the 2nd floor when he stopped. The glass that lined the upper level was dark enough from outside to be nearly invisible. A mirror to anyone below, a window to anyone above. He had stopped to say something to the man beside him when his eyes moved across the floor below and landed, without intention, on a woman in a black dress, laughing. He didn't know what she was laughing at. He couldn't hear it. The sound didn't reach him. But he could see the way it moved through her. Starting somewhere in the chest, lifting through the shoulders, releasing into something unguarded and completely real. Her head went back slightly. Her hand came up to cover her mouth for half a second before dropping again. Like she had started to suppress it and then decided not to. The gold earrings caught the light. He watched for approximately 4 seconds. Then he finished his sentence to the man beside him, said nothing else, and walked to the window. He stood there longer than he should have. He was aware of that. He watched her in the way he watched things that didn't make immediate sense to him. Carefully, without expression, filing information. She was with a group. She was comfortable with them, but slightly outside the center of it. The way people are when they are present, but also privately somewhere else. She moved when she danced, which she did briefly and without self-consciousness. But she kept coming back to a stillness that felt like home to her. She had a way of listening to whoever was talking that made it look like the most natural thing in the world. Like she was genuinely interested. Like she had nowhere else to be. He had spent decades reading rooms. It was survival. The same way breathing was survival. And what he read in her, from 40 feet above and through soundproof glass, was something he hadn't encountered in a long time. A person who was exactly where they were. Not performing. Not calculating. Simply there. He turned to his assistant and said it the same way he said everything. Quietly, without inflection, like he was noting a weather change rather than doing something he had never done before in his life. Buy out her section. Full service for the night. Anonymous. His assistant looked at him, waited for an explanation, didn't get one, and went to make it happen. Tiffany was mid-conversation about Deja's neighbor's cat, which had apparently developed an unexplained hostility toward the mailman, when the server arrived. She watched the man set down the bottle with both hands and explain, with practiced discretion, that the table's service for the remainder of the evening had been taken care of, courtesy of the establishment, with compliments. Deja reacted the way Deja reacted to good news, which was loudly and with her whole body. Maya started scanning the room immediately, looking for the source. Courtney picked up the bottle to read the label and made a sound that Tiffany interpreted as deeply impressed. Tiffany looked at the server and asked who had sent it. He smiled pleasantly and said only that it was an admirer who preferred to remain anonymous. She sat with that for a moment. She was not naive. She knew what it meant when powerful men at expensive clubs sent over bottles without introducing themselves. She had watched it happen to other women enough times to know the shape of it. There was always a second act. There was always something implied in the gesture, an advance payment on a conversation she hadn't agreed to have. She knew this. She kept her hand on her clutch, drank water for the next 20 minutes, and watched the room with the quiet attention of someone who understood that free things were rarely actually free. But the second act didn't come. No one appeared. No one sent word. The rest of the night moved the way good nights move when you stop waiting for something to go wrong. Slowly and warmly, full of small moments that you don't fully appreciate until later. Deja danced until her feet hurt. Maya found someone to talk to about something Tiffany couldn't make out over the music. Courtney decided she was going to become a DJ, which was not the first time she had decided that. Tiffany laughed. Genuinely, more than once. She forgot about the left heel. She forgot about the Monday morning calendar and the inbox and the performance review that wasn't going to go the way she deserved. She was, for a few hours, exactly where she was. She didn't know a man upstairs was watching the shape of that, quietly, and deciding something. She didn't know that the night, the simple, ordinary, shoe-pinching night, was already the beginning of something she had no framework for yet. She was just a woman at a birthday party, and somewhere above her, behind dark glass, a man who had stopped feeling things years ago was standing still in a loud room, feeling something, and not yet knowing what to do with it. The morning after a good night always has a particular texture to it. Not bad exactly, just honest. The dress hanging on the back of the bathroom door, the gold clutch on the kitchen counter, slightly open, the way you leave things when you come home tired but happy. The left shoe abandoned near the front door where she had stepped out of it the moment she crossed the threshold, like a small act of liberation. Tiffany made coffee the way she always made it, too strong, with exactly 1 spoon of sugar, and stood at the kitchen window watching the street below settle into its Saturday morning rhythm. The livery trucks, a man walking a dog that was walking him, a woman in a yellow coat moving fast with somewhere to be. Chicago did not take weekends off. It simply changed the pitch of its noise. She thought about the bottle. She thought about the server's diplomatic smile and the way he had said admirer with such careful neutrality, like the word was a container he was handing her, and it was her business what she put inside it. She thought about Deja screaming with delight, and Maya scanning the room, and Courtney holding the bottle up to the light like evidence. She thought about how she had waited for the other shoe to drop, the approach, the implication, the moment some man in an expensive suit materialized beside their table with that particular expression that said, "I bought something, now where is what I bought?" And how it had never come. She filed it under strange but harmless and moved on. She had laundry to do. He was in a meeting when he told his assistant to find out her name. He said it between 2 other instructions, one about a shipment rerouting and one about a legal document that needed a second signature, as though it were the same category of task. His assistant, a man named Sujin who had worked for him for 7 years and had learned that questions were rarely welcome, wrote it down without expression and went to work. It took 40 minutes. The club had cameras. The cameras had timestamps. The timestamp matched the table. The table had a server log. The server log had a credit card receipt from earlier in the evening, before the anonymous service took over, and the name on the card was Tiffany R. Caldwell. Sujin put the name on his desk. Hyun-Hoo looked at it for a moment. Then he put it in his jacket pocket and didn't ask for anything else about her. He didn't know what he was going to do with it. That was new. He was not a man who collected information without intention. He was not a man who acted without a clear reason he could articulate. But something about the deliberateness of that felt wrong here, like applying the wrong tool to a thing that wasn't a problem. She wasn't a problem. She wasn't a variable. She was a woman who had laughed in a room full of people performing happiness, and it had done something to the inside of his chest that he didn't have efficient language for. So he put her name in his pocket and let it sit there for 2 days. On the third day, he called her. She almost didn't answer. The number was unknown, and she had a policy about unknown numbers, developed over years of spam calls and one deeply regrettable conversation with a man from her building who had somehow gotten her number from the front desk, which was to let them go to voicemail and evaluate from there. But something made her pick up on the fourth ring. She would not be able to explain it later. Maybe it was idle curiosity. Maybe it was the particular quality of the silence between the rings, which told her nothing and somehow still told her something. "Tiffany Caldwell," she said, the way she answered calls at work, crisp and prepared. A pause, then, "I should have introduced myself Friday night." She knew the voice immediately, not because she had heard it before, but because some voices arrive already familiar, already weighted, like they were designed to land. Low, unhurried, accented in a way that was precise rather than thick, like someone who had learned English as a second language and then spent years making it exact. She sat down on her couch. "How do you have this number?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I own the club," he said. "Information is easier to find than it should be. I apologize for that." She thought about hanging up. She thought about it the way you think about leaving a room when the conversation has just become interesting, as a theoretical option that your body has already decided against. "You sent the bottle," she said. "Yes." "Why?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Because you were the only real thing in the room." She told Deja about it 3 days later, in the way you tell a best friend something you haven't fully decided how to feel about yet, which is to say, starting in the middle of the story and working outward in both directions, watching the other person's face for cues. Deja's face cycled through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, delight, concern, delight again. "He owns the whole club?" "Apparently. And he found your name from the receipts." "That's what he said, Tiff." "I know. That's either very romantic or deeply alarming." "I know," Tiffany said again. "That's why I'm telling you." Deja was quiet for a moment, which for Deja meant something was serious. She stirred her drink. She looked at the table. She looked up. "Did you give him your number again?" "I didn't have to," Tiffany said. "He already had it." "Right." Deja nodded slowly. "And you're going to keep talking to him?" It wasn't a question. Deja knew her too well for questions like that. She knew the particular quality of Tiffany's voice when something had already moved something in her, when the decision had already been made somewhere below the level of conscious thought, and the conversation was just catching up. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Tiffany said. But she had already answered his second call. And his third. And she had laughed twice during the third one. Once at something he said, and once at the fact that she was laughing. Because it surprised her, and the surprise surprised her more. He called every day for 2 weeks. This was not something he had planned. He was not a man who planned softness. He had built his entire architecture of living around the principle that attachment was a liability, and that the most dangerous thing a man in his position could possess was something he couldn't afford to lose. He had watched men like him come undone by exactly this. By a woman, by a child, by some small, warm thing that became a pressure point, a target, a weapon in someone else's hands. He knew this. He had watched it happen. He had, on more than one occasion, been the one holding the weapon. And yet... He called her on a Tuesday from a car outside a warehouse in Bridgeport, engine running, waiting for a meeting that was running late. He called her on a Thursday from a hotel room in New York, between two other conversations about money that would have seemed incomprehensible to her. He called her on a Sunday morning, and she answered in a voice that told him he had woken her up, and he almost apologized, which was not something he did. She talked to him about her job the way people talk about things that exhaust them, but also define them, with affectionate irritation. She talked about her mother in Atlanta, calls every Sunday, a woman who asked too many questions and meant all of them with love. She talked about the city with the quiet authority of someone who had lived in it long enough to know which version of it was real. She was funny in a way that was dry and precise, not performed. The kind of funny that catches you off guard because it isn't trying to. He listened. He was, across his life, a man of enormous capability and almost total silence. He had sat in rooms where everything was decided and said almost nothing. And the nothing had carried more weight than everything else combined. He knew how to process information, how to identify leverage, how to read the space between what people said and what they meant. He had never, in recent memory, simply listened to someone because he wanted to hear what came next. He wanted to hear what came next. The first time they met in person after the club, she picked the place. She was very clear about that with herself. She was not going to his territory, not going to anything he chose, not going to sit in a room where all the power in the room was his before she even arrived. She picked a coffee place on the north side, busy enough that it felt safe, public enough that it felt like she had options. He arrived exactly on time. She had expected late, the way powerful men are late as an assertion of priority. He was on time to the second. He looked different in daylight. She had seen him only briefly that first night, in low club light, in a context that already made him larger than ordinary. In the afternoon, in a coffee shop, he was still large. Not in a way she could explain easily, not just his height or his build, but in the quality of the space around him. The way the room reorganized itself slightly around his stillness, but also more specific, more detailed. She could see the neck tattoo clearly now. The dragon reaching upward, intricate, permanent, like a decision made a long time ago that he had never once regretted. She could see the way he looked at her when she sat down. Not sweeping, not appraising, just direct. Like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at, and he saw no reason to pretend otherwise. She thought, I am in over my head. She smiled anyway. You're on time, she said. I'm always on time, he said. I didn't know that. Now you do. She ordered her coffee. He ordered nothing, then changed his mind and ordered tea, which she hadn't expected. She didn't know why she'd had expectations about his order. She noticed that she did. They talked for 2 hours. It didn't feel like 2 hours. It felt like the particular compression of time that happens when you are paying full attention to something, when the conversation is moving fast enough that you don't notice the gaps, when you are learning someone at a pace that feels both slow and somehow urgent. He didn't tell her what he did. Not really. He told her about the clubs, the legitimate surface of it, and she let him, because she was not ready yet for whatever was underneath, and she suspected he wasn't ready to say it. There were things he didn't answer directly, angles he moved around with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for so long it had become unconscious. She noticed every one of them. She filed them. When she stood to leave, he stood too. He walked her to the door. He did not touch her. At the door, she turned. "I'd like to do this again," she said. He looked at her for a moment. That direct, unhurried look that she was beginning to understand was not blankness, but the opposite of it. "So would I," he said. She walked to her car in the November cold, the city loud and ordinary around her, and felt something shifting in her chest, like furniture being rearranged in a room she had kept closed for a long time. She didn't look back. But she knew, without looking, that he was still standing at the door, watching her go. There is a particular kind of knowing that lives below the level of language. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with evidence or argument or a clean list of reasons you can read back to yourself at 2 a.m. when the room is quiet and honest. It simply settles into you over time, the way cold settles into a house in winter. Gradually, through the small gaps you didn't think to seal, until one day you realize the temperature has changed, and it has been changing for a while, and you were the last one to notice. Tiffany noticed on a Wednesday. She was at her desk, 3rd floor of a building downtown that smelled like printer toner and other people's ambition, transferring a call for a man who had mispronounced her name for 14 months, despite the placard on her desk that spelled it out in clean block letters. She was doing this the way she did everything at that job. Efficiently, without complaint, with the particular grace of someone who has decided that their dignity is not contingent on whether anyone else in the room can see it. She put the call through. She updated a calendar. She answered an email in 3 sentences that would have taken her manager a paragraph and a half. And somewhere in the middle of that, her phone lit up on the corner of her desk with a message from Hyun-woo that said only, "How is the coffee today?" It was not a question with a question mark. It was the kind of statement that people make when they already know the answer and want to hear you say it anyway. She had told him, 2 weeks earlier, about the coffee machine on the 3rd floor, how it produced something that was technically coffee in the same way that a puddle was technically water, and how she had started bringing her own from home in a thermos that her coworker Kevin had described as aggressively practical, which she had taken as a compliment. She looked at the message. She felt something move in her chest. Not dramatically, just a small, quiet shift. The kind that means something has already happened and you are only now catching up to it. She typed back, "Thermos day. The machine is on its own." His response came in under a minute. "Good." She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment longer than necessary and thought, "Oh. Just that. Oh." The full weight of it in 2 letters. She was in this. She didn't know exactly what this was, couldn't have drawn its borders or named all its dimensions, but she was in it the way you are in something when turning back would require more energy than continuing forward. When the map you started with no longer matches the terrain. When the question is no longer whether, but how. She put her phone face down on the desk and went back to work. He took her to dinner 3 weeks after the coffee shop. Not his restaurant. She would learn later that he owned 2 in the city. Quiet places with menus in both Korean and English that cost what a week of her groceries cost per plate. He took her somewhere she had mentioned once briefly, in the middle of a longer story about a birthday dinner years ago that had gone wrong in every possible way. A Haitian place on the west side. Small, warm. The kind of restaurant that operates as though it has nothing to prove because it doesn't. She had mentioned it once. He had remembered it. She wore a deep burgundy wrap dress and the gold earrings again because they were the ones she trusted. And she had decided, somewhere between leaving work and arriving at the restaurant, that tonight she was going to ask him the question she had been circling for weeks. Not aggressively, not as an accusation, just cleanly, the way she asked all the questions that mattered. Directly, and with enough stillness that there was room for a real answer. She waited until after the food came. She waited because she was hungry, and because the timing of a question changes its shape, and she wanted this one shaped right. "Tell me what you actually do," she said. He looked at her across the table. He had a way of receiving difficult things without flinching. Not because they didn't land, she was beginning to understand, but because he had spent so long controlling his reactions that the control had become structural, load-bearing, part of what held him upright. "I run businesses," he said. "I know the version of that sentence," she said. "I want the other one." A long pause. He set down his fork. He looked at the table for a moment and then back at her. And she saw something move across his face. Not guilt, not defensiveness, but something more complicated. The look of a man deciding how much of himself is safe to give. "There are things I manage," he said carefully, "that exist outside of what is legal. Distribution, territory, agreements between people that courts don't recognize, but that hold anyway because I enforce them. The Mafia," she said. Plain. No drama around the word. "That word belongs to other people," he said. "But the shape of it." "Yes." She sat with that. She had known it. Had known it the way you know a thing you haven't let yourself say yet. The neck tattoo. The men who moved around him like weather. The calls that ended without explanation. The particular way he occupied a room, like a man who had never once in his life had to wonder if he was safe in it because he was the reason other people had to wonder. She knew all of it, and she was still sitting here in a burgundy dress, eating the best rice she'd had in years and feeling, underneath the weight of what he had just confirmed, something stubborn and warm that refused to move. "Why are you telling me?" she asked. "Because you asked," he said. "And because you would have known anyway. You already did." "That's not a reason to confirm it." "No," he said. "The reason I confirmed it is that I don't want to lie to you." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is either the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me," she said slowly, "or the most dangerous." "Probably both," he said. She picked up her fork. She took a bite. She looked out the window at the street where Chicago was doing what Chicago did. Moving, breathing, indifferent and magnificent. And she thought about what it meant to know a thing and stay anyway. Whether that was strength or foolishness. Whether there was a difference from the inside. "Okay," she said finally. He looked at her. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I'm still here," she said. "I'm not saying it's fine. I'm saying I'm still here." Something happened in his face then. Not a smile. He didn't smile easily, she had noticed, as though the mechanism for it had rusted slightly from disuse. But a loosening. A small, almost imperceptible release, like a room exhaling after holding its breath. "I hear you," he said. The weeks that followed were the closest thing to ordinary that either of them would get. He came to her neighborhood twice without making it a production, appeared at her door on a Sunday afternoon with coffee from the place 2 blocks over that she had mentioned liking, stood in her kitchen while she finished a phone call with her mother, sat on her couch and read something on his phone while she graded her mental list of things she needed to do that week. It was domestic in a way that felt strange coming from him, and natural coming from her. And the combination of those two things made it something she didn't have a word for yet. She met Sujin, who treated her with a respectful wariness that she recognized as the specific caution of someone who cared about their employer's well-being and was reserving judgment about anything that threatened to complicate it. She understood that. She didn't hold it against him. She learned that Hyunwoo didn't sleep well. Not as a confession. He would not have called it that, but as a fact that surfaced naturally. He was often awake at 3, 4 in the morning. He texted at those hours sometimes. Not urgently, just small observations. A news item. A question about something she had said days earlier that he had been turning over. Once, simply, "Do you dream?" She had woken up at 6 to that message and lay in bed for a few minutes, thinking about what it meant that this man, in the hours when the armor was most off, thought to ask her that. She texted back. "All the time. You?" He took a long time to respond. When he did, he said, "I used to. Not recently." She didn't ask him to explain. She thought she understood. There was an evening in early December when everything felt exactly right, and she almost didn't notice it because it arrived quietly, without announcement. They were in his apartment. She had been there twice before, a high floor in a building downtown that was minimal and precise in the way she had come to understand was his natural language. Everything selected and purposeful, nothing extra. And she was sitting on the floor by the window with her legs crossed, reading something on her phone, while he sat on the couch behind her, working through a document she wasn't meant to see, and that she had no interest in seeing. The city was lit below them, grid and pulse and motion, doing what it always did. There was music playing low, something Korean, melodic, older, that she didn't know the name of and didn't ask about. At some point, she became aware that he had stopped working. She looked up. He was watching her. Not with intensity, not with calculation, just watching. The way you watch something that you want to keep. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." She turned back to her phone. She felt warmth move through her that had nothing to do with the heat in the apartment. "You do that a lot," she said. "I know. It doesn't bother me," she said. "I'm just noting it." "Noted," he said, and she could hear in it, without seeing his face, the ghost of something that in another man, with more practice, would have been a smile. She looked out at the city. She thought about how far this was from the life she had been living 6 weeks ago. The exact same apartment, the exact same job, the exact same coffee in the exact same thermos, the same Sunday calls with her mother, and the same Friday nights that she sometimes canceled because the couch was easier. The same Tiffany. And also not. She thought about how the smallest decisions are the ones that move the most. Not the dramatic ones, not the ones you deliberate over for weeks. The ones you make in 4 seconds with a ringing phone in your hand, tired from a Friday night, with a left heel that had pinched the whole ride home. She had answered the phone. Everything after that was everything after that. What she didn't know, couldn't know, sitting warm and quiet 60 floors above the city that was indifferent to all of it, was that 2 miles away, in a room with no windows, a man she had never met was holding a photograph of her that had been taken without her knowledge on a street she walked every single day. And he was not looking at it with admiration. He was looking at it the way men like him looked at things they intended to use. The music played. The city moved below. Hyunwoo sat on the couch behind her and watched her the way you watch something you are afraid, for the first time in a long time, of losing. He didn't know yet either. But something in him, some old, battle-worn instinct that had kept him alive through things she would never fully know, had started quietly, without his permission, to get ready. The photograph was taken on a Tuesday. She never knew that. She would never know the specific Tuesday, never know the angle, never know that the man behind the camera had been sitting in a gray sedan across the street from her office building for 3 days before he got the shot he needed. Her face clear, her expression unguarded. The office building visible behind her in a way that confirmed where she worked and when she left, and how long the walk was to the parking structure on the corner. 3 days of her ordinary life, documented by someone whose name she would never learn, for a purpose she was never meant to understand. The photograph moved through 3 sets of hands before it reached the man who had commissioned it. A man named Dmitry Vasilenko, who ran the eastern corridors of Chicago's underground with the particular brutality of someone who had grown up watching brutality succeed and had drawn the obvious conclusion. He was not sophisticated in the way that Hyun-woo was sophisticated. He did not believe in restraint as strategy. He believed in pressure, in finding the place where something bends and pressing until it broke, and then using the break. He had been watching Hyun-woo for 2 years. Not out of fear. He would never have admitted fear. But out of the specific attention you pay to someone who is quietly acquiring what you want. Moving into spaces you intended to occupy. Doing it without confrontation and without announcement, and therefore without giving you anything to push against. Hyun-woo's expansion had been invisible until it wasn't. By the time Vasilenko understood its full shape, it had already cost him 3 distribution agreements and a port arrangement that had taken him 4 years to build. He needed a pressure point. He had been looking for one for 18 months. Hyun-woo was, by design and by discipline, a man without them. No family he was close to, no partners he was sentimental about, no visible attachments that couldn't be replaced. And then, there was a woman in a black dress at a club on a Friday night. Vasilenko looked at the photograph for a long time. He thought about what it meant that a man like Jang Hyun-woo had done something as irrational and visible as buying out a stranger's table. He thought about the follow-up surveillance, 2 weeks of it, that showed the same woman entering Hyun-woo's building, leaving Hyun-woo's building, receiving coffee from a place 2 blocks from her apartment that she had not gone to before this started. He put the photograph on his desk and made a decision. Not to hurt her. Not immediately. That would be too direct, too loud, and Hyun-woo would retaliate in ways that Vasilenko was not yet prepared for. No. He wanted something smaller and more precise. He wanted Hyun-woo to know that she was visible. He wanted him to feel the specific terror of a man who has allowed himself to care about something and suddenly understands what that costs. He sent 2 men to follow her. Just to follow. To be seen following. To let the message deliver itself. She noticed them on a Thursday morning. Not immediately. Not in the way that people in films notice surveillance. Dramatically, with a sudden turn and a confirmed suspicion. It was slower than that, and quieter and more unsettling because of it. A feeling first, the kind that lives in the back of the neck, that the space around you is being occupied differently than it should be. She had walked to the coffee shop on her block, the one she went to on days when she hadn't prepped her thermos the night before. And there had been a car parked across the street that she registered without meaning to. Gray, ordinary, engine off. A man in the passenger seat looking at his phone. She didn't think about it on the way in. She thought about it on the way out, because the car was still there, and the man was still looking at his phone, and the phone had not moved in the 12 minutes she had been inside. She walked to work the long way. She didn't know why. She told herself it was for the air. The gray car did not follow her, but a man on foot in a dark jacket stayed half a block behind her for 4 blocks before she turned into her building and the door closed between them. She stood in the lobby of her office building for a moment. She felt her heart doing something she didn't like. She took 2 slow breaths. She went upstairs. She answered emails and transferred calls, and updated 3 calendars and did not look out the window. At lunch, she went to the bathroom and called Hyun-woo. He answered on the second ring, which was faster than usual, and she registered that too. "I think someone is following me," she said. She said it the way she said hard things, plainly, without performance, because she had found that the performance of distress cost more energy than the distress itself. The silence on his end lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. In that silence, she heard something she had not heard from him before. Not in 6 weeks of daily calls, not in 2 hours at a coffee shop, not in a quiet apartment 60 floors above a city. She heard him go very still. Not the ordinary stillness, the other kind. "Where are you right now?" he said. "My office building. I'm inside." "Don't leave until I tell you it's clear," he said. Hyun-woo. Tiffany. Her name in his mouth, direct and low. "Please." She had never heard him say please before. It was a small word in an ordinary sentence, and it landed like something heavy. "Okay," she said. He knew before she finished the sentence. He knew the shape of it, the specific geometry of what had just happened, the way you know the sound of a door you have heard break before. He had been watching the temperature of things with Vasilenko for 3 months. He had known it was building. He had moved resources, repositioned arrangements, done everything a man in his position does when the weather is changing and he intends to be prepared. What he had not done, what he recognized now with a cold clarity that moved through him like winter through old walls, was remove her from the equation. He had told himself there was time. He had told himself the escalation would come through business channels first. He had told himself, in the particular way that people tell themselves things they want to believe, that she was separate from this, that he could hold the 2 worlds apart by sheer force of intention. He had been wrong. He made 3 calls in 4 minutes. By the time the 3rd call ended, there were 2 people he trusted. Trusted in the absolute and non-negotiable sense of that word, which for a man like him was a very small number. Within 1 block of her building. Not visible. Just there. Then he sat in his car and pressed his hands flat against his thighs and did something he almost never did. He thought about what he was risking. Not abstractly, not as calculation, but concretely. Her face in the coffee shop, the way she had looked out the window at the city, the Sunday morning text about dreams, the sound of her voice when she was tired and talking about nothing important and didn't know he was paying attention to every word. He thought about what it would mean to lose that. And then he thought about the fact that he had let it become something that could be lost, which was a different and more personal failure. He drove to her building. She came down when he texted her. She walked out of the elevator and through the lobby and out the front door, and he was there on the sidewalk, which she hadn't expected. She had expected a message, a set of instructions, the managed distance that powerful men maintain between themselves and the consequences of their decisions. He was just standing there, on her sidewalk, in his coat. She looked at him. He looked at her. The full, direct look, taking her in completely, making sure she was intact in the way that people check on things they have been afraid for. "You came," she said. "Yes," he said. "You didn't have to do that personally." "I know." She looked at him for a moment longer. "You're scared," she said. Not cruelly, just as an observation, offered gently because she was someone who saw things and didn't look away from them. Something crossed his face. She watched him consider denying it. Watched him decide not to. I am not accustomed to it, he said. No. He told her everything that night. Not in the apartment. Not in a restaurant. They sat in his car, parked on a quiet street, the heat running, the city moving around them at a remove, and he told her, in the careful, economical language of a man who had never narrated his own life to anyone, what the situation was. Who Vasilenko was, what the following meant, what was likely to happen next, and what he had already done about it. She listened without interrupting. This was one of the things about her that he had learned. She did not fill silence with noise. She let information arrive and settle before she responded to it. It was a rare quality in anyone. In this context, it felt like a gift he hadn't earned. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You knew it was escalating, she said. Before today. Yes. And you didn't tell me. No. Why? He looked at the street ahead, at the ordinary Thursday night moving past the windshield. People walking, a bus pulling away from a stop, a woman pushing a stroller in the cold with the specific determination of a parent who has places to be regardless of weather. Because if I told you, he said, you would leave. And I wanted more time. She turned to look at him fully. He didn't turn to meet it. He kept his eyes on the street, and she understood that this was not avoidance, but exposure. That looking at her while he said it was more than he could hold at once. That wasn't your decision to make, she said. I know. I am not something you manage, Hyunwoo. I am not a variable you move around to get the outcome you want. I know, he said again. And then quieter. I know. I'm sorry. The apology sat between them. She could feel the weight of what it cost him. Not performing contrition, but actually arriving at it, which for a man who had spent decades being the one who was never wrong in any room that mattered, was not a small thing. She looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about the thermos on her desk, the Sunday calls with her mother, the life that had been exactly what it was before a phone rang on a Friday night and she had made a 4-second decision that brought her here, to this car, on this street, next to this man who was the most dangerous and most honest thing that had happened to her in years. She thought about who she was before and who she was now, and whether those were different people or the same person finally in a situation that required her full size. I need you to understand something, she said. I am not afraid of hard things. I did not survive this city, this job, this life by being someone who runs from hard things. But I will not be protected from the truth by someone who thinks protection means control. Do you understand what I'm saying? He turned to look at her then. Finally. The full, unguarded look. No calculation in it, no management. Just a man looking at a woman who had just said something that reached the part of him that almost nothing reached anymore. Yes, he said. Then we do this differently, she said. If I'm in it with full information. Not managed, not handled. With you. He looked at her for a long time. That puts you at more risk, he said. That's my risk to take, she said. Not yours to decide. Something settled in him. She could see it. The same loosening she had seen at dinner, but deeper this time, reaching something more structural. Like a man setting down a weight he had carried so long he had forgotten he was carrying it. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Vasilenko's men were intercepted before the week was out. She was not told the details and did not ask for them. She understood, in the way she was learning to understand things in this life, that there were edges she could approach and edges she couldn't, and that knowing which was its own kind of intelligence. The threat dissolved the way threats do when the person being threatened turns out to have more capacity than anticipated. Quietly, without ceremony, the gray sedan stopped appearing. The man in the dark jacket did not come back. She went to work. She answered phones. She updated calendars. She carried her thermos. Kevin from accounting said she seemed different lately. She asked him what he meant. He said she just seemed like she was taking up more space. She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. She called her mother on Sunday. Her mother asked if there was someone. Her mother always asked. This time, Tiffany paused for half a second longer than usual before saying maybe instead of no. And her mother, who had raised her to notice the weight of words, heard the whole story in that half second and said only, "Be careful, baby girl. But don't be so careful you miss your life." She sat with that for a long time after they hung up. 3 weeks later, she was at his apartment again. Not for any particular reason, because it had become, without announcement or ceremony, a place she went. She was on the floor by the window, her spot, which had become her spot without either of them naming it. And he was on the couch, and the city was doing what it always did below them, vast and indifferent and alive. He said, without looking up from what he was reading, "I dreamed last night." She looked up. "Yeah?" "Yes."
"What about?"
A pause. Long enough that she thought he might not answer. "This," he said. "Just this." She looked at him. He looked back at her. The city moved below. The music played low. She thought about what it meant that a man who had stopped dreaming had started again. What that cost. What it meant to be the reason. Whether she was ready for the size of that. She decided she was. She turned back to the window. Outside, Chicago went on being Chicago. Complicated and cold and luminous and completely indifferent to the small, enormous thing that was happening 60 floors above its streets. A woman who had almost stayed home one Friday night. A man who had looked through dark glass at the wrong, or right, moment. A 4-second decision that neither of them had fully made. That had somehow made itself. That had pulled them both into something neither of them had a complete map for. No map, no guarantee, no clean ending